Well, the race is on. I've got a whole pile of gifts I've thought of in my head, but they don't exist in real life yet. So the kids are at school and I've got some time to bash through some DTF printing. Now, in today's video, I wanted to cover something that I love about the maker community: the value of cross-skilling. I love it when I see tips and tools from one hobby or skill being transferred to another. So it's so satisfying when I see on Discord or Patreon someone sharing an obvious tip that they use in their interest to someone in another. If we've all learnt one thing from RPG games, having a range of skills as a maker makes you far more potent. So here are my 7.5 top tips that I've stolen from other skills to help me deal with awkward DTF prints. And don't worry if you don't have a DTF printer, because most of these are useful even if you're using iron-on labels. These are actually great examples of why I think cross-discipline hobbies are so valuable. You'll see techniques and tools pinched from 3D modeling, woodworking, sewing, and even electronics. So, time to fire up my X-Tool apparel printer and get making. Oh, and see my other video to see what makes this thing so brilliant. The first failure point with awkward surfaces isn't heat or pressure. If you don't have enough pressure, you can likely do it again. But if it moves, you're in trouble. And if something can move, it blimmin' well will, usually at the exact moment you're committed. I'm printing this tea towel with my family's favourite recipe for bara brith. This is a traditional Welsh fruit loaf. Now, lots of countries have something similar, it's just not as good. And this is the best of the best, a top secret recipe passed from generation to generation at my Nine and Tides chapel. Legend has it, it was invented by dragons, maybe. I'll post this recipe for YouTube members and Patreons to try, and then we can make this recipe international. Anyhow, this design is much too big for my small heat press, although it is worth noting that X-Tool do have a large one. But it means that I'm going to have to do this in multiple presses to cover the area, risking moving the design. So I pinched a trick from electronics. This stuff. This tape is used to protect circuits while you're soldering, insulating components. Some of you will recognise this from the early days of 3D printing around heater components. It's great as it's designed to stick things without leaving any residue, without stretching, and it's able to survive high temperatures, which also makes it perfect for clothing designs where you're ironing on things or heat pressing. Any process where heat is unavoidable and precision matters ends up using this stuff. I use it all the time and I love it. But before anything moves or lifts, there's another problem. You don't actually know where the right place to put the tape is. You can't just mark your lovely fabric like you would with a piece of wood. Except you can. I've been using these friction pens to draw temporary reference marks directly onto the fabric. You've probably seen these pens before. They're designed for writing on paper and the ink is erased by rubbing it away. Basically, there's a temperature-sensitive solvent that reacts with the ink to turn it clear when it hits around 60 to 65 degrees C. So anything that goes above that temperature, like a heat press or an iron, would have the same effect. So I use these when sewing all the time, precisely because they disappear with heat. Once the iron or heat press goes on, the marks vanish completely. Now, technically, the ink is still there. It can reappear at very low temperatures, around -10. But for something like a tea towel, it's not a concern, unless you're baking in the Arctic. One of the things I love about DTF printing is that you can create designs with transparency. This can be super tricky with other methods. For very detailed designs like this, the chances are that some of the marks are so small that it won't transfer to the fabric first time. I don't see this as failure, but rather feedback. Just stop what you're doing and reheat. If you catch it early, you can usually rescue it completely. You just need to apply heat again, but you're not going to solve a detail problem by applying force everywhere. What I find works really well is to use a cheap wooden spatula to apply a bit of extra pressure to the problem areas. That way you apply pressure exactly where it's needed. This shows up in veneer and vinyl work as well. I tend to use a woodworking roller with veneer, but perhaps I'll think about using a spatula next time. Now, let's move on to this PU leather glasses case for my mum, who my children call 9. The problem here is that it's not flat. But if a surface isn't flat, you can make it flat. And I'm doing that by transferring a technique from the virtual world into the real world. I used to do a bit of computer graphics design back in the day, creating textures for 3D models for gaming. To get the skin of a 3D object, you UV unwrap it. So if I was a game texture, I'd look something like this in the 2D world. Not my best look. But this allows you to paint on your 2D design to the unwrapped shape and have it translate correctly. I need to do something similar with the glasses case, but in analog. I'm capturing the shape with painter's tape because it'll be gentle on the surface below. Then I apply duct tape to map out the area I want to apply the design. As you can see, the design area is only slightly curved. If I was mad enough to try to cover the entire case, and I was mad enough to try but changed course, I would use a 3D scanner. But because it's only a subtle curve, this taping technique is much quicker and it works really well. The idea is that I can now stick it flat to the table and add a jig so that my camera is perfectly parallel to the design. I hope you appreciate my jig design here, by the way. It's important to include a measuring tape in your photo so that you can set the size of the DTF print later on. I can then take the photo of the flattened skin of the case into my design software. I'm using Photoshop, but I think in theory it might be possible to do this in Xtool Studio. As this is a symmetrical object, I only trace around one side of it with the pen tool, copy it, flip it, and merge the shapes together. This just ensures a nice even design. Now we have the design area, it's time to apply the design. This is a painting my daughter did when she was about 1 or 2 years old, and I'm using the shape to create a clipping mask so that it will fit the glasses case. If I wanted to create lots of glasses cases like this with different designs in future, I would turn the painting layer into a smart object to easily swap the image without any additional work. After this, I bring the design into Xtool Studio and ensure that the size matches the measurement in the photo. Which brings me on to my next problem. How do I apply this print to a curved surface? I originally planned to use Xtool's mini iron here. This is ideal for awkward or small surfaces like shoes or inside things. But holding an iron in one hand and the object in another can be quite unwieldy, and I needed a much lower temperature than the mini iron can do for this PU leather, as PU leather will start to deform at relatively low temperatures. Perhaps this is well known in the world of DTF, but for me, the solution didn't come from printing, it came from woodworking. If you've ever sanded something small, you know it's often easier to bring the object to a fixed sander than to hold a sander in one hand and the work in the other. So I recreated that idea with heat. By flipping the press upside down, which luckily, or perhaps deliberately, has flat handles, I could use both hands to control the object. I wasn't fighting an iron, I was guiding the surface, and it worked brilliantly. I am so excited by this discovery. I want to try it on all sorts of curved surfaces now. A lot of workshop activities work better when the tool stays still and your hands do all the work. This kind of thing is something I love figuring out. What's obvious in one hobby may not have yet made the leap to another. Okay, next I'm tackling this fabric toolbox. I'm keen to make sure that the design looks integrated, like it was always meant to be there. And the first step is matching the colour. If I just picked a random red for this graphic, it would still work, but it would feel like an afterthought. Your eyes are surprisingly bad at judging colour in isolation, especially when you need to transfer a colour from the real world onto the screen and then onto ink. You only need to think back to that blue, or was it a gold dress that nobody could agree the colour of. That's where objective reference tools come in. I used this colour matching tool, and I'll pop a link in the description, to sample the red that already exists on the bag. Okay, not exactly. The red thread was just too small to capture, so I found a red top that looked very similar and matched to that. The difference is subtle, but on screen it would have been a nightmare to try to get it right. This is exactly the same approach used in interior design when matching wall paint, or in automotive repairs when blending panels, and in product design when graphics need to feel intentional rather than decorative. Once the colour matches, your brain stops seeing a print and starts seeing a finished object. But in this case, I went a step further. After all that effort, you can see that the graphic still looks stuck on. And this is because, well, it is. So I reprinted a design which I adjusted to look like a piece of embroidery. And it now looks a lot more integrated. You don't need this for every project, but when you want something to feel designed rather than decorated, it helps to match the colour and the texture it's on. Okay, time for my half tip. It's probably stating the obvious to people who work with apparel printing all the time, but as someone who is used to designing on screen, I will often enhance a graphic with a glow or a shadow. Don't do this when designing for DTF. It just looks a mess. So keep your designs crisp and clean at the edges. Semi-transparency is a no-go as far as I can tell. The print is either there or it's not. It can't be halfway in between. So what works lovely in web design does not convert to clothing. My final tip is to ignore the name Xtool have given their DTF printer. Yes, it's awesome for apparel, but it can do so much more. In fact, I have only made one piece of clothing in this set. This t-shirt for my music-loving dad, who was the recipient of a triple heart bypass several years ago. So you can naturally also print onto non-apparel fabric, like this tool bag, the glasses case and tote bag. But what might be less obvious is that you can go beyond fabrics. Let me show you with this final gift to myself. A sign for the new testing area of my workshop. And in the spirit of the sign, I decided to test which material would work best, acrylic or wood. I thought that it might be a bit faded on wood as it might be absorbed into it, but I found that both were equally vibrant. I used a rather thin bit of acrylic, which might not be a fair test because it warped and I had to clamp it under some plywood. It was harder to apply and the results were not successful, perhaps because it's a more heat-sensitive material. I suspect a thicker piece of acrylic would have been fine, but overall it is the wooden sign that has earned its place in my testing zone. So thank you, me, for this lovely gift. So those were some of my top tips, which are a product of experiments and experience of other crafts rather than years of experience in DTF. I still break things, I'm still experimenting. So have a think about what tips you could take from one hobby to help in another. It's usually here that you discover some really obvious penny drop moments that can save you hours and hours. But if you have any thoughts or experience you'd like to share, or any weird things you've DTF'd on, please do comment below. And I've put all the links to all the things that I've used in this video below. Hwyl fawr a Nadolig llawen.